Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's SWE changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 62 with the title, It's Painful Not to Belong. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome my guest, Lysette Offley. Lysette describes herself as the genius maker Lysette Offley, founder of Genius Material and the Genius Principles. When I asked Lysette to describe her superpowers, she said, tenacity and sense of humour. Not taking herself too seriously allows her to get back up again and keep going. I know that feeling. Hello, Lysette. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Absolute pleasure. I know we planned this a while ago, and it's finally great to get you on the show. Thank you. So, Lysette, tell me, it's painful not to belong. What does that mean to you?
I should imagine that most of us at some point have experienced that feeling, that uncomfortable feeling that there's something wrong. I certainly know that I have in my time. Two things in particular jump into my mind. The first, perhaps, was when I was at school, secondary school. I had to board for a couple of years. So having started the school as a day girl, or as the boarders called them, day bugs, I then had to board for a couple of years. So I ended up not in either camp, really, not belonging to the one and not belonging to the other, because all the friendships had already been made by the time I joined the other camp. And that felt really uncomfortable. I was into everything. I was in the orchestra, I was in the tennis team and the lacrosse team and so on and so on. So I was in groups, thank goodness. But most of the time, I felt like a fish out of water, didn't know where to go, who to talk to, how to be, really. Felt very uncomfortable.
How did you overcome that? Or was it just a case of bouncing back and being resilient?
Well, I guess at the time, I simply got on with it. I just made the best of everything I could make the best of. Like I say, I was, into lots of stuff. And so there were times when I certainly felt included, like the orchestra, for example. But at the age of, 14, 15, 16, I just got on with it the way that it was. Over time, things changed. And for example, when I went off to university, very quickly I found myself included, for want of a better word. Just felt as though I belonged, I was loved, I was accepted, I existed as I am. And, nothing wrong. In fact, the opposite. And I guess I hung on to that experience as an alternative that you can always find somewhere where you can feel like you belong. But then maybe that's something that you may or may not learn as you get older and wiser and get a bit more experience under your belt.
So you mentioned a couple of things there. So inclusion and belonging, there's a difference, isn't there? How do you experience the difference between those two phrases or words?
I guess in that example, for me, inclusion is where perhaps the environment, other people, circumstances make it easier for you to step into that space and join in and be part of what's going on. Belonging, perhaps, is the feeling that comes out of that you're not worried that you're in the wrong place, that you feel as if you have a part in that place. And I'm just trying to cast my mind back to how it felt. I can't speak for anybody else, but I think that's how it materialized for me.
Yeah, I think it's different for each of us, and I know what it's like to be excluded. I know what it's like to be tolerated, put up with, and I guess I know what it's like to be included. And I suppose for me, when I think about belonging, it's that extra level above inclusion is where you're truly part of something. Your opinion really matters. You're part of the organizing. You're you're the go-to person. You have value. You feel that if you like the passion or the understanding of the mission that whatever you're trying to achieve. I think that's for me is that extra on top of inclusion where you feel part of the organization or part of whatever you're taking part in.
Yeah,
Whereas
you're
inclusion,
making
you
me
kind of
think.
you've let in, aren't you?
Yes, you're making me think about it. And I guess possibly for me, because I am an extrovert, which means that most of my energy goes out towards other people rather than inside myself. And I guess the belonging part for me is no longer focusing on me, whether what I'm doing, what I'm saying, who I'm being is acceptable and okay, but actually just so much myself that I disappear, that I'm focusing on what I'm doing there, who I'm doing it with.
Hmm.
So I think,
Yeah,
I've not really thought about this too much before. So it's a great conversation to have. It makes you think.
yeah. Do you remember the American sitcom? Was it Canadian sitcom Cheers? The bar where everyone knows your name, and I think
Mm,
the difference for me being included is walking in. Everyone says hi, how you doing? What can I get you? Belonging is where everyone knows your name. Everyone knows what you're going to drink. Everyone is pleased to see you. There's kind of this
mm.
extra level of thinking, this is my place. That for me is the kind of the icing on it.
And another dot that I'm now connecting is that my dad was in the army and we did a lot of traveling, in my early years. It wasn't until I was 8 years old that I spent more than 2 terms in any one primary school.
Mm,
That's how much traveling we did. So I guess the belonging thing just wasn't really a thing. It hadn't
mm,
materialized. I didn't know what it was. You'd, goodness, I'm going back how many years trying to think about it now. But I suppose I didn't expect necessarily to feel like I belonged. I didn't have much experience of that. Any feeling of being established or comfortable in an environment wasn't for long each time. And you know what?
mm,
There are pluses and minuses with that. There are skills and experiences that I've acquired because of that, and other things that I've missed out on because of that. There's no right or wrong about it. But it doesn't half
yeah.
tickle me now, having lived in the same area for the last 32 years, that I also come up with things like, oh, yes, but I know someone you can talk to that can help with that, because I now know I'm more familiar with my own environment. And
Mm.
that only began for me in half a lifetime ago.
Yeah, and picking back on what you're saying about how you started off as a day girl or day bug, as you put it, and then
Mm,
moved on to being a boarder. You weren't excluded from either camp, but you never really fitted in either because
mm.
that's the belonging.
Ah,
That's
and
my
then,
tribe, if you
yep,
like, my
that's
people.
right. And no one else knew that that's how I
Mm,
was feeling. And I think that's one of the things about the feeling of belonging, or rather the opposite of that very often other people don't realize that you're struggling. In
mm,
fact, only a week ago, I got an email from Dr. David Hamilton, who is a world class author and much loved. And he's on the speaker circuit. He's a global name in self development. And he was talking about all this very same thing, and also saying that other people more than likely won't recognize. While he seems confident and happy on the outside, sometimes he's struggling with these insecurities on the inside. And
mm,
that's tragic, really, for all of us, because we're more the same than we are different. We all need the same things. And there are so many of us who, for the want of a gentle word, or, a kind word, or, something, could feel so much better. I went to
mm,
a school reunion yonks ago, and as I walked in through the door, I could either have lunch with the day bugs. And, I use that word because that was a term that boarders used. So it was definitely a them and us situation. So I could either go and sit and have lunch with the day girls, or go and sit and have lunch with the boarders. I didn't know what to do. And by that, I mean, I didn't know what I was supposed to do, what other people
mm,
would think of me if I chose A over B. Anyway, I chose A and got into conversation with somebody who had always been in that camp. And she was astonished that I had any of these negative feelings at school. She said that I seemed confident and happy and, like I keep saying, into everything. She had no idea. And she obviously, was the sort of person who would have gone the extra mile for me if she'd realized that I was struggling in any shape or form. But I didn't let on, because for me, there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't accepted. And I bet that's part of the problem for a lot of people too, not feeling as if they're belonging, not knowing what to do or how to be in order to be accepted, and all the while making it mean that there's something wrong with them. And
Do you
that's in a
think
way
that,
how I got into the work I do.
yeah, do you think that plays into your identity? Um, when you again, using your day versus borders analogy there, you didn't know what your identity was. Were you a day girl or were you a border?
Mm.
And you didn't want to be picking a side. You wanted to be in the middle of everything. So your identity was confused. Therefore, you didn't feel like you were belonging fully in either camp, because you weren't bringing who you were, because you didn't really understand who you were as well. And I'll give an example in my own life. When I gender transitioned about 5 years ago, I was a member of a club, and the club is for men. So when I was invited back to come as me, as a woman, it didn't feel right, because my entire identity around that club was as a man, but I wasn't a man. It just felt uncomfortable. I was felt very welcome. I was felt very included, but I didn't belong there. It
Mm.
wasn't my people. It just felt wrong. So I
Mm.
think our identity is hugely important when we think
Mm.
about whether we belong as part of something or not.
And in the example that I'm using, of course, a teenager desperately, we all go through, well, I say we all go through, but it's common for us to go through a phase where we just want to fit in. As a teacher of 20 years, watching the teenagers growing up, understanding that they all like to feel as if they're rebelling against authority, their parents, the school, just being themselves, doing things their way. And they all end up looking the same anyway. They've all got their skirts hoiked up to here and their socks down to there, and their tie round their neck, in an attempt to not conform, but they've all not conformed in an identical fashion, because that means they fit in.
Yeah.
They fit in with
It's
each
that
other. And
anarchic, isn't it? Yeah.
we go through that phase, I think, where it's really important to us to begin to learn who we are, so that we can be ourselves, but at the same time, we're an acceptable version of ourselves that
Mm.
our peers accept. It's quite a complex thing, really. I mean, time and time again, I think just how amazing we are as human beings, that
Mm.
we can do any of that stuff at all.
It's kind of creating our tribe, isn't it? Our safe space,
Yeah,
the people we feel
yeah,
comfortable around. Yeah, the people
yeah,
are trusted. It enhances our belonging, our identity.
yes.
I think, yeah, if we think about, when we can relax our psychological safety, we trust those people around us. You think back to every generation of young person who's grown up. I think since post-war, I think rock and roll, the 50s, was the first time that children were allowed to have an identity that wasn't
Yes,
based around their
and a
parents. That's when we had
uniform,
some freedom.
their
Yeah.
own
And
uniform.
we're able to break out. And I think, if you
Yeah.
look back to my childhood, I suppose I grew up in the tail end of the 60s and the early part of the 70s. So it was kind of a bit of flower power, flares,
Mm,
hippie,
mm,
moved into rockers, punks,
mm.
and then evolved into new romantics and mods and rockers and things. So each one of those different groups, different based on music, based on culture, based on
Mm,
dress sense,
mm.
created their own sub identity, their own identity, who they were. I'm a mod, I'm a rocker, I'm a new romantic, I'm a punk. Yeah, and you say they're trying to be different, but they're being different within a tribe, within a community where they
That's
have
right.
that sense of belonging.
Because of course, as time's gone on and I've learnt my craft, with the work that I'm doing now, I've realized that one really quick and easy way of feeling like you belong is to make yourself as a group different from another group or the others. And we
Mm.
we do that watching football. I'm wearing a blue shirt and I'm a Chelsea fan, and the others are over there are wearing a red shirt and they're an Arsenal fan. I mean, the fact that they live next door to me and will, have cups of tea together and whatnot is irrelevant right now, because right now they're over there in red and I'm over here in blue. So, that can be fun and games and perfectly natural and healthy for us. So when we overstep the mark and we take all of that far too seriously and we think it really, really means something about us, it's an easy route to take, to find something that you have in common with somebody that nobody else shares, because that makes you feel as if you really know and understand each other. You're another version of me and I'm okay. So yeah, it's very, very interesting, and I've noticed that as I've learned about psychology and about the way human beings work. I can see the wood for the trees a lot better than I ever could when I was 14, 15, 16, just trying to survive.
It's funny you're saying you and your blue shirt Chelsea supporter. I have been to Stamford Bridge once. My friends, he even named his daughter Charlie after Charlie
Ah,
Cox. Charlie Cook, is it Charlie Cook, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He even named his daughter after Charlie. Anyway, but so my blue comes from Portsmouth, and
Okay.
my brother moved to Derby, and there was a year when Derby and Portsmouth were both in the same league, and my brother's children became Derby County fans because that's where they
Of
lived. Why
course.
not? I mean,
Yeah.
it's obvious. They even
Yes.
acquired a bit of a Derby accent, and I remember my brother said, "Well, do you want to go and see Pompey play Derby when
Mm.
you're up here at the baseball ground or wherever they were playing at the time?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be fantastic." And it never occurred to me I'd be in the Derby County end.
Yes.
So there I was with my brother and his two children and my wife
Mm.
Marie. We were in the Derby County end, and Portsmouth scored first. And of course,
Mm.
I
Mm.
had to stay
What do you
sat
do?
down. I had to put my hands between my legs and go, and just sort of let out a little yay quietly. And
That's
then
funny.
Derby equalised the second half, and I remember sitting there thinking,
Yes.
I can't be the only
Mm.
person for miles
Yes.
sat on my
Not
seat looking
cheering.
miserable. So I had
Yeah.
to sort of stand up and sort of make it look like I
Go
was
through the
happy, and then sat
motions.
down to get through the motions.
And of
And it was the
course,
most uncomfortable thing, I've ever been through. And it
and
made
that's
me
a
realize
very
again
benign thing.
belonging. Yeah,
Yes, and it's a very benign thing because you're with your family, for goodness sake.
mm,
But sometimes, the situation can be a lot more dangerous than that, can't it?
yeah. And it's now leading me to think, when people cover, mask, or hide their identity, which is what
Mm.
I was effectively doing,
Yeah,
it was so exhausting. And
yeah,
at the end of it, I felt this huge
yeah,
sense of relief to go back into the air
yeah,
and breathe again. And it's not until we started talking that I remember those feelings about I was covering and masking my identity. I was hiding who I
yeah,
was.
yeah. Well, that's actually one of the genius principles, giving yourself permission to be yourself and finding a way to do that safely, because it's totally exhausting. It uses a lot of your brain power, thinking all the time, what am I supposed to be doing? What's acceptable here? Who should I be? And if part of your brain is doing that, well, then good luck being good at whatever it is you are trying to do,
Mm,
your job of work, or being the best parent you can be, or, whatever the situation is. It's exhausting pretending all the time. And yet, we all talk about inclusion, and yet, a lot of people find it very difficult to be themselves in their place of work. They hide themselves, or they pretend to be someone else. I even knew somebody who deliberately started wearing dull color clothes, not like her at all, normally, but started wearing navy blue, brown, and black at work, hoping that she could blend into the background because she felt so threatened there. At the same time,
wow.
she was trying to step forward and be available for promotion and new opportunities. And that's like, putting your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. Because if you're trying to blend into the background, you're going to end up with the jobs that nobody else wants. And you're certainly not going to shine and, be the best version of yourself. And it's just so common. That's the tragedy of it all. We keep talking about everyone being themselves and bringing their thing. Oh, Oscar Wilde, something like "Be yourself, everyone else is taken." Great,
Mm.
great, great. But actually doing it can be another thing altogether.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, be yourself, YOLO. Be authentic self. My reaction to that is that's easy for you to say.
Yeah.
The more privilege you have, the less complex your life is, the less you've got to hide. Of
Mm,
course, it's easy to be yourself.
mm,
I think it's a very invalidating statement. It's like saying everyone can succeed if they try hard enough.
mm,
Be yourself. Everyone else is taken. Yes, it's an ideal, but
mm.
it almost invalidates other people's lived experience, the challenges they faced in their life, and it's
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is. When you're talking about the complexity of this multiple identities or covering your identity, I always think it because I've got a computing background, and I always think of it as like an extra subroutine that you have to insert between every word or every sentence. So you've
Mm.
got all that extra processing going on before you can move on to the
That's a
next thing that comes out
great
of your mouth,
analogy. Yeah.
and it
How much
just
effort
slows the
does that
program
take?
down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's you think about people who are in the LGBT community not wanting to talk about their wife, their same sex partner, the fact they've
Mm,
got children,
mm.
women who don't want children, women who do want children who can't have them, IVF, menopause. You think of all these things that we're talking about in the workplace, and we're just zipping our mouth. I can't talk about that. Can't talk about that. Can't talk
Mm,
about that.
mm. Yeah. It doesn't make for an easy existence, does it? For any of us.
No, and that comes back to it's painful not to belong because you
Yeah.
can't be
Yeah.
your truth, can you?
Well, we're hard, and I mean, now I know that we're hardwired to belong. Physiologically, we're the same as we were 10,000 years ago when we lived in caves.
Mm.
You had to belong. Not belonging meant being on the outside of the cave, and it was dangerous out there. So evolution has seen to it that we try very hard to belong to each other so that we can all stay safe. And physiologically, we're the same. We've got a different environment, different constraints, different things to cope with, but the machinery we've got to cope with it is the same. So we're still looking for those signs of danger that, something's up. This is getting to be a dangerous situation. That look they just gave me, did I say something out of turn? Am I okay? So, I understand those things now. So when I catch myself, even now, I'm not even now, we're all hardwired to notice those little moments in order to keep us safe. So when I say even now I'm noticing, of course I am. We all are. But this time round, when I do notice those things happening around me, and I'm just wondering if I've upset somebody or something, I'm aware first of all that's potentially what's going on. But I'm also aware why I might be hyper alert to it, and I'm aware of my stuff that I'm piling into it. And
Mm.
then I might call out the elephant in the room, which I never would have dared to have done back in the day when I wasn't sure if I belonged, if I was good enough. And now I might just say, oh, what just happened? Did I say something? Did that trigger something? Have I said something out of turn? And then, boom, you clear the air. And 9 times out of 10 is, what are you talking about? What do you think just happened? Nothing happened. And I've just thought I've seen something that, really wasn't there. I was just being too vigilant.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think you're right. We have this innate sense of belonging, the tribe, the prehistoric prehistory evolution of our species, our communities. We do live in a more complex world, but our fundamental
Mm,
needs. I mean, not
yeah.
everyone agrees with Maslow's hierarchy,
Mm,
but belonging is right in the middle there, above the survival
yeah.
stuff, above the
Yeah.
utility stuff. So yeah,
And
we have to feel this sense of belonging before we can sort of get to this point where we can self-actuate and get on with life and build relationships.
well, everything comes down to relationships and people. There's nobody exists in isolation. I don't think anywhere. I don't think it is such a thing. I don't think it exists. We all depend on other people, whether we're conscious of it or not. If you want to go and if you want to eat, you have to get some food. Where are you going to get the food from? Who's put it there? You know, how are you going to get there to get it? Other people have had a hand in your means of travel, or everything depends on other people having already done something or are in the process of doing something. So no wonder we're hardwired to belong, because it serves us still now. And the world is a much happier place if we do recognize the similarities between us. Whatever's going on for me, if I realize probably pretty much the same thing is going on for the other person, that's a very different circumstance from fearing the other person because you don't recognize the way that they're being or who they are or what they're saying, what they're doing, fearing that, and then either hiding away from the world because the world's a threatening place, or attacking in some way them or anybody else. Both are just unconscious strategies for surviving,
Hmm.
and neither of them are particularly effective for what happens afterwards. It reduces the possibility rather than, I mean, gosh, this sort of thing takes a bit of understanding and a bit of practice, but actually, we do all need the same things. We all need to feel that we have some control over our own lives. We need to
Hmm.
feel as if we're okay. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but that we're good enough as we are. We don't have to be something different in order to be accepted. We all need to feel loved and appreciated. We all need to feel that it's okay, that we're okay.
Because some of those fears we have, um, fear of humiliation, fear of rejection, fear of making people's judgment,
Mm,
all the things that kind of hold us back. And it's,
mm.
as you were speaking then, I think, yeah, we do like to be liked. We
Oh,
need
yeah,
to be loved.
yeah,
We need
yeah.
to be valued. We need to have a purpose. We need to
Mm,
understand our part in the big cog of life or society. And there's such a fear of being an outlier for many people, not everybody. Some people are
mm,
happy being on the edge and being an outlier. But as we said earlier, there's you're outlying with another group, another tribe who are outliers together.
mm,
So there's a community somewhere. But yeah, I think there is this. What holds people back sometimes is that social responsibility, that need to conform in order to get that validation of who you are. And it's really hard sometimes to whack that stop button and say, hang on a minute, who am I?
mm,
What do I want? Where
mm.
am I heading? Am I really going where I want to be, or I just got on this escalator at the age of 16 and I'm just heading upwards?
But to your point about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, going back again to school, I'm afraid and I'm ashamed to say that I was in the camp who used to bandy it about. What's the point of doing Latin? It's a dead language. No, you've heard it all before. It's a dead language. You should be doing something more useful, blah, blah, blah. And I played up in lessons, which was your job as a kid. As a year, 20-year teaching for 20 years, you think, oh, well, they're just doing what I used to do. But, now I am fascinated by language. I'm fascinated by the origin of words, the spelling of words. Why do you spell this way, but you spell that way? If I paid more attention in my Latin lessons, I would be the wiser and happier for it. But I was on the bandwagon. I just picked up the conversation that was going on around me. There would have been other conversations going on around me, but I wasn't paying attention to those. I jumped in with this particular camp and I agreed with them wholeheartedly. But I was only 11, 12, 13. That's my excuse. As you get more experiences, as you get older, you get wiser, you begin to notice other things, then perhaps you're able to make your own decisions more easily. As that's on an individual basis, but as groups, I think that's the case, that there's this natural maturity or not, that groups develop at a certain pace for that group. And even countries, I think, develop in their wisdom and experience and all of those things.
Yeah,
So
I would call that a maturity model, isn't it? When you have sort of level
yes,
0, level 1, and that you can apply that to societies, to organizational growth and development. Where are you in your growth,
absolutely,
aren't you?
absolutely. But where I am right now, personally, in my life, I can be talking about that sort of thing. I wish I'd paid more attention in Latin.
Hmm.
I'm not scratting about every day looking for something to eat or looking for some way to earn enough money to feed my family. You can be quite sure I wouldn't be talking about Latin lessons if that were the case. So it's all very well, you know. it's all very well when you've got the fundamentals in place, the things that we really need, the fundamental things that we need. There might be space in your head for the more advanced, the more developed, the more sophisticated thoughts and behavior. And when you've got that in place, there might be a bit of space in your head for the next level up. So I'm not just taking care of my lot now. Now I can think about people I've never even met, but I know it's right for me to lend them a hand or to steer things in such a way that they are better off than they would be if I just turned my back on them. I don't know quite how we got into this.
No, it's brilliant. I was chatting to a GP trainee earlier, and we were talking about what's going on with trainee GPs over the last couple of years in COVID, and around the burnout, around the disruption to their studies, how there's a lot of imposter syndrome about, I can't be a real GP because I haven't had real GP training. Can I trust myself? And we probably did this at school as well. I remember doing this, about being so fixated on my grades, my exams, and then disappointing myself, and then moving on to another, worrying about this. And it's only when you're, I don't know, when you're older long in the tooth and old enough and ugly enough, you look back and go, none of that really mattered, did it? It was just kind of, it was just another stage to get me to the next door. It was up to me to open that door and make the most of it, and to move on to the next door. And I think we do expect qualifications to give us the keys, give us the answer, but really they're just enablers, maybe to give us confidence or to help us focus or whatever it may be. And I think I've never learnt Latin, but I can right click, select, paste into Google Translate, and I can translate Latin, and I dare say I could have a good hash at going the other way. I think had I realised that there was going to be a little red squiggly line or a green squiggly line under words in the word processor in 50 years' time, I would have probably paid even less attention at school at the time. Had I known when the teacher said, you're not going to have a calculator wherever you go in the future, and you think, well, actually I do at the moment. I've got one on my watch. I've got
But
one
isn't that
in my back
tremendous, though? You know, a few years ago, we went to a Shakespeare play at the Globe Theatre, and even though the acoustics are so great in there, just kept missing the odd word and couldn't keep up, and then had a brainwave. Googled on my phone the script, the play. And while there were just one or two places where they shift a couple of things around or left a sentence out, it was almost identical, which meant I had my own subtitles. And isn't it fantastic that we can do that?
Brilliant.
We went to Lohengrin last night at Covent Garden, and I kept hearing little threads, little leitmotifs, they're called, little phrases of music that kept coming back. Lohengrin there's a swan who brings the hero to the stage. He's riding on a swan's back, and we kept getting the first few notes of Swan Lake. I thought, hello, who stole what from whom? First thing I did was went straight to my phone and discovered that Swan Lake was written 30 few years later. So Wagner invented that little phrase. It might be a total coincidence, or it might be sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing going on. So when I have the time, I'll go back to Google and I'd start educating myself on just a little snippet of music that now I'm fascinated by. And that's something that's happened in our lifetime, obviously. My niece has always had that as a facility. So you can't anticipate when you're at school. This is like me talking to my younger self now. You can't anticipate when you're at school what's going to be useful and why. And it's the same with every experience in life. The best you can hope for is just to suck it all in. Just get the best experience you can, get the most out of everything you can right now, even with things that you can't quite see what the point is right now, because you never know. It might be a tremendous advantage later on, just for fun, if nothing else.
Yeah, maybe the life lesson at school is building curiosity, building inquisitiveness, building the tenacity to find out more, and being able to translate into application, if you like. You learn, then you can apply. Or learning in chemistry, maybe it's about learning the methods of an experiment. This is my conclusion. So I often still think about my chemistry lessons when I'm writing blog posts or reports. I've
Really?
got to have a conclusion. I've got to have my
Yeah.
recommendations
Yeah.
and a conclusion. So it's
Yeah.
kind of
Great. Yeah.
so nothing to do with chemistry, but it's probably taught me a lot of life lessons that I use now in a different
Yes.
way.
Yeah. So that's about skills and strategy, which you can then adapt and use where relevant in your life, which is what I really enjoy about Genius Material and the Genius Principles, which is what I do now with people, because it completely transforms their outcome when they've got the handful of skills that they need, makes a huge difference to how they approach something, and therefore a very big difference to the results that they get. And it's still the same person. It's not like anything has happened for them that couldn't happen to anyone. Like the Latin thing, if I'd paid a bit more attention, then I would have learnt because I was in the right place and I was being taught the right way. It's not that I was in the wrong place at the right time. I was in the right place at the right time and not paying attention. So now I can't apply any of those rules. I keep saying to myself, one day I'll go and buy a book, or I'll go on a GCSE Latin course or something, because I would love to know. Of course, the thing is, as you get older, it feels as if time races away from you, and you've got all these other things you've got to do, and it'll be on that list forever, I bet. Things that I might get round to doing one day.
So much of what you do is around development for women, from what I understand. Is that right? The Genius
Yes, but
Principles
not
and material
necessarily.
is
Yes,
around.
not just women though. The My program Genius Material came out of helping teenagers initially learn how to learn for their GCSEs, their A levels, even degree level. Um, and then somebody pointed out to me that financial services, people in financial services, needed to pass some exams before the end of 2012, or they'd lose their jobs. And then I started helping people in professional services. So that's men and women. And I teach them how to learn. So I teach them what to do with the information they've got. So their brain makes a pattern of it, sends it to their long term memory. And because we're hardwired to forget, once it's in your long term memory, then you'd better have a simple system for keeping it there. Where the women specifically come in is because the Genius Principles is all about using your brain to get better results in your life. Things like confidence, procrastination, imposter syndrome, all those sorts of things. It can often be women in a male dominated environment. I'm having conversations all the time with people in top jobs, women in top jobs, who I would call them top jobs, who've been extremely successful, who've been offered some promotion. They know they can do the job and they still haven't stepped into it. Something's causing them to think, oh, yes, but what if? What if I can't cope? What if they find out I'm a fraud? All these things are going on. And I'm not saying for a moment that that doesn't happen for men, because I know lots of men, clients who have had similar things going on. And it's often women in a male dominated environment who just need to understand what's going on in their head. Why? So instead of being thwarted by their thoughts, they work with their thoughts so that they can just safely step forward into a new role and know that they've got every bit as much right to be there as anybody else, and they will learn on the job. No one expects them to know all the answers straight away. It's having the confidence in yourself to know that you'll do your best, it will take however long it takes, and everything will be okay.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's having the confidence to know that everything will be okay.
You
Because
just
when
need
we've
you
not
just
been
need to
through
be good
things,
enough.
yeah,
You just need to know that who I am is good enough. I'm okay with me. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I misjudge things. I say things, do things that I wish I hadn't done. I'm not perfect, but I'm okay with who I am because none of us is perfect. And if I can live with me, then it makes it easier for other people to live with me because we're all
mm,
in the same boat. We mess up, we apologize, we try and do better the next time. It's not the end of the world.
yeah. I think you can put a bit of French into there and say, "An earth is an earth, an egg is an egg, and enough is enough."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think if we're not if we're not kind to ourselves, as you say, we keep trying to chase this ideal, and actually that ideal is being somebody else.
Mm.
Not being good
Mm.
enough in our
Mm.
minds is I need to be someone different. Whereas if we can find that self-acceptance, self-belief, self-love, self-identity, we can start to believe that what we are is good enough, as you say. And I think that was another phrase is perfection is the enemy of progress or something.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
never get something done whilst
Mm.
you're always focusing on it. And I've had these debates with people in the past and saying, it's not about 80-20. People say you got to get 80% and 20%.
Yeah.
Some people say, no, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be right. It's got to be right. And you get to these sort of
Mm.
philosophical debates about when is a brain surgeon good enough. And I said, well,
Mm.
surely the definition of good enough for a brain surgeon is the patient makes a recovery they don't die is first of all, then they make a recovery to a certain point. And that person, their life is still productive. I
Mm.
guess that's good enough. Whether they can walk perfectly afterwards is is that failure? No, because the outcome has been positive. Their cancer, their tumor has been removed, whatever it is. So I think, we have to set sometimes our goals on the way in that we're trying to be, rather than get to the end and go, well, I didn't meet my goal that I wasn't sure what it was anyway.
Mm.
So I think destination planning is very useful, so we know when we are good enough.
I think being kind to yourself, understanding and generous with yourself, at the same time acknowledging things that perhaps you can do differently the next time, I
Mm.
think is the key. There's a lot of research around belonging and learning. We can't learn if we don't feel like we belong. So that's something that schools and universities really need to focus on. I remember years ago, I was quite active at the theatre, the local theatre, and I've done some lovely things down there. I've been the MD of some of my favourite musicals. That's just like heaven. You raise your arms to start. Nothing, no sound whatsoever, dead quiet. You move, and this wall of sound starts. Oh, I've got the shivers just thinking about it. One occasion, I was auditioning for the part of an opera singer. I am not an opera singer. It was for Jenny Lind in Barnum. And I resisted it and resisted it and resisted it. My friends were saying, go for it, go for it. And I'm not an opera singer. I'm going to let everybody down. It's going to be farcical. And then, some friends were saying to me, but there is such a thing as a light operatic voice, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what changed everything for me was the director sidling up to me and saying, you're the best we've got. We haven't got anyone better for the job than you. She wasn't saying you're the best in the world. She was saying you're of all the average to better people that we've got who could do the job. For that job, you're the one for that job. And so I can stop thinking about me. I started thinking about the group, what the group needed, and auditioned for the part, got the part, pulled my socks up, worked really hard at it, because that's what I do, took it very seriously, did the very best I could, and I think got away with it. I had a blast, loved it. And the whole show all unfolded, and it all worked out happily because everybody who got a part did the best they could too. So sometimes it's
Yeah,
worth thinking about, if can I, what's the best I can do? Is that good enough? I don't have to be better than anyone else. I just have to be the best I can be. Is that good enough? And the answer
yeah,
ought to be blooming
the
well,
best
yes.
today, the best
Yes.
in the room, the
Yeah.
best of the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I dare say that had there been another candidate who was in quotes better,
Yeah, of course.
but
And
they
I'd
may
have,
still feel that they're not the best, and they would have someone they would
yeah.
look up to and say, "Oh, hang on a minute, I'm not really that good."
But it's interesting. It's not exactly a numbers game. It's kind of a combination game. When I actually have sat on audition panels and realised now how difficult it is, because you've got particular roles that you need to fill, and you've got a finite number of people you can draw on to fill those posts. And the ideal man, so if you start with the first male role, for example, the ideal man is that man there, bang, job done, brilliant decision. But you've got to match him up to an appropriate woman for them to look as though they're falling in love and the story can unfold. And now you've got a height thing, you've got an age thing, you've got all sorts of stuff going on. So hang on a minute. So let's just pull that man out of there because he'd be really good in that other position over there too. Let's just hang on to him as an idea for the second male role for the moment. If we put this other man into that position, look, we've got a choice of two great options to go against blah 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 blah. And then you put that one with, you should have a computer program, I think, to sort all of this out. That would be much quicker. And so that's why I got the role, not because there was anybody else who might have sung it better, looked better, moved better, all those things, but because everybody had to slot in to a place where the whole thing as a whole worked as well as it could work. And on that basis, I took the role because I knew that it was going to be okay when I focused on the whole rather than just on me being something that I felt I wasn't. It was a
Yeah, that
lesson. It
sounds
was a
something.
lesson there for
Yeah,
me.
that sounds like something I've got a soapbox sort of talk about, which is about meritocracy in the hiring process.
Mm,
And often when we're selecting who is the best candidate for the job, who is the best person for this role, our criteria is very, very narrow. It's years experience, done the job before, worked for a similar company, demonstrable, etc., etc., etc. But we often forget the other factors. You say the height, the accent, the all those
mm,
other soft skills,
mm,
your your empathy, your compassion, your ability to get on with others. And so when we're looking at who the best person is, it's exactly the same way as when you're choosing your leading lady and leading man. There's a whole load of factors there
mm,
that make up the best person. And I think sometimes in business, we tend to focus on these hard skills rather than
mm,
some of the softer
mm.
nuances that make someone a better fit, a better belonging, if you like.
Yes, yes, and better as a cog in the group wheel. That's
Yeah. I mean,
yes. I
we
don't know
want
if
to
I can mix my
challenge.
metaphors there.
We don't necessarily want culture fit. We
Mm,
don't want to make sure we have this
mm,
monoculture of people who are the same, but we do need to make sure that we are giving people that fair choice. Otherwise, we end up with just people who have done it before without necessarily the extra dimension, you say, of the fit of the other skills they bring.
Don't you think part of that whole issue, though, is that it's much easier to see what qualifications, years of experience, companies they've worked with? It's a lot easier to tick those boxes and put them in the possibility
Yeah,
pile than to
because
have an
yeah,
interview and try and make those
yeah,
judgments for yourself.
recruiters want to see a CV. They want when
Yeah.
they're doing their interview
Mm,
planning. It's much easier. Well, it's much easier to. It's perceived to be much easier to be objective when you're comparing absolutes or evidence. It's a lot harder to be objective when you're looking at potential, capability,
mm,
ideas. That takes a
mm,
different type of recruitment process to be able to drill into being creating scoring systems and
mm,
keywords and how would you type phrases around situations, which you can then evaluate in a more sort of
mm.
rounded way. So yeah, it's a different skill, and we invented the fact when we invented fax machine, we invented the CV. Before then, we had application forms, didn't we? We used to fill
Yes.
in that.
Yes.
We'd phone up the company and say, I'd like to apply for the role, or you see it in the
Yeah.
newspaper. And then they'd send you an application form. You'd write it out longhand in pencil first and go over the top of it in ink so you
Mm,
didn't make any
yeah.
mistakes.
That's right.
Then you'd post it off. So
Mm,
we didn't have, we couldn't even photocopy it. So unless we
mm,
wrote it out twice on our own bit of paper, we'd
mm,
never know what we said.
mm,
And then the fax machine came along, the printer came along, computers came along, and we invented the CV. We all had a
mm,
resume. Then
mm,
email came along. We now PDF it and email it off. So
mm.
if we invented the CV, what probably late 80s, early 90s, we can uninvent it and go back to um, just think about how we can get the best out of people and understand that about potential rather than just past performance. Another soapbox of mine.
Well, we all do have our own biases, unconscious and otherwise. I've
Mm,
forgotten which orchestra it was, but they put each auditionee behind a curtain,
yes,
so the people choosing, some violinists could only use their ears, and it's quite interesting that they ended up as a consequence, perhaps with a different balance of types of people from different backgrounds from they might how they might have done if they were
yes.
paying attention more to the CV. before they even
Yes,
walked
because
into the
from the
room.
audience perspective, the orchestra look very orchestral, don't they? They have a certain body stature. They have a certain, I don't know. There's something about people who are playing an orchestra that they look like orchestral
Mm,
people. So I guess if you're doing blind or anonymous auditions, then at least you can take out that visual factor,
yeah,
that class element maybe, or that schooling element. It's just
yeah,
purely down to how
yeah.
do they sound.
Yes, exactly, which probably is quite important in an orchestra, you'd have thought.
You'd like to think that was one of the key
Yes,
criteria,
yes, you think so.
and timekeeping and relatability
Well,
and
there are
being
other
part of
things,
the team,
of
all those sort of
course,
things.
there
Yeah,
are.
that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm dying to ask you about Grand Designs. You mentioned that your house was featured on
Oh,
Grand Designs. Tell me a bit
yes.
about that. I'm
That was a
fascinated.
very, very, very interesting experience for us because I think I know I was very naive about the whole thing. It hadn't occurred to me that it was a reality TV show and subject to all the usual social media scrutiny. It just didn't occur to me. What did occur to me was it would be nice to support our architect, um, just get a bit of publicity for him because what he was doing was ambitious and clever and lovely. Um, and he was my first husband. So, I wanted to do that. Um, but what I hadn't realized is once you're on the telly, then in effect, you've put your head above the parapet, and I just wasn't ready for it. And I found that really hard. In fact, I wouldn't even have known about it, except that our episode was let's think about this. Our episode was the 99th episode, but we were invited to London to the studios to celebrate the 100th episode, which was going to air the week later. But we went to an early viewing of it the night that our show was airing. Does this make sense?
Yep, yep.
So our show was actually being played to the nation while we were watching the following week. And Kevin McLeod did a little bit of an introduction to everything. And he mentioned hashtag grand design. So for the first time in my life, I went to Twitter and watched the Twitter feed unfold during our show, in effect. And I was really, really astonished because we built our house for us. We bore in mind the effect it was having on the environment and the neighbours and everything else. So it should have all been, all happy days for everybody. But we built it in the style that we wanted for us, not for someone else. So I could have been perfectly happy. I would have been perfectly happy with some people saying, "Ooh, that's horrid. Don't like that." And some people saying, "Oh, I quite like it actually." That would have been absolutely fine because, who doesn't have their own taste in
Mhm.
houses as well as everything else? But what I really wasn't ready for was the abuse.
Wow.
And what I realize is that because it's what do you call it? A reality show, there's got to be an angle. And we had two angles. The first one was the fact that I was married to our architect. And the second was that there was huge antagonism with the neighbours at the time, some old school neighbours who wanted a house with a pointy roof, and we weren't going to do that. So they, the show interviewed a lot of the neighbours, and there was a lot of vitriol and all sorts of stuff going on. And so consequently, a lot of the abuse was about how horrid we were as people. And I just wasn't ready for it. I found it very difficult. Now, what was interesting, talking about this belonging thing, I joined in the conversation. So the woman from Grand Designs joined in the conversation. And I just said, "Oh, I'm sorry you think that," or "Oh, it's interesting you should say that. Actually, X, Y, Z." So I was being really kind of what would the word be? Kind of open about the whole thing, not giving them two barrels, which is what I felt like doing sometimes. And they were attacking me. It would have been nice to have attacked back, but I didn't do that. I was just. But what was interesting was that 9 out of 10 of them piped down immediately. It was all, "Oh, welcome the celebrity to the fold" sort of attitude. I'm not a bloody celebrity. I just happened to be on the telly for 10 minutes. But all of a sudden, because I became a real person, or maybe even a part-time celebrity, as I say, for 10 minutes, there was a whole other attitude. It just nipped some of it in the bud. But of course, as the years ago, that was 10 years ago. And, we're on repeat all the time. So there'll always be a flurry of the same again. And I do think it's unhealthy. I do think it's a problem. And it doesn't really affect me very much these days because I'm expecting it. I'll see it and I'll go, oh, we're on again. Here we go again. And I know they don't know me. I know they're misjudging me because of the angle of the show. I know that I'm an okay person. I had to work really hard, still do have to work really hard in the face of all of this. You're not good enough. You don't belong. We're ostracizing you. We're judging you. It's been a hell of a lesson. And I do think, honestly, that programs need to take better care of the people they depend on to make their programs. To take, one very, very extreme case, not the Jerry Springer, the other one, Jeremy Kyle's show stopped dead in its tracks. I use that word deliberately. It's not fair because, a lot of people we're all vulnerable. We all have different levels of vulnerability. And we're all vulnerable in one shape or form. And, throwing people into a situation that they can't cope with, I think is a very cynical thing to do. And I'm not talking about any show in particular now. I'm talking about, in general, the way that we treat the people we see on the telly.
Yeah, my wife and I had a similar experience. We, but maybe not as extreme as yours, but we took part in a Channel 4 documentary over a 3-year period. So we were followed, and so it was a longitudinal study, I think they called it, of gender transitioning. So they followed me in the early stages through 3 years of our lives, and there was 8 other people who also featured. And we did receive some good safeguarding by Channel 4 RDF. So we were assigned I'm not sure whether you call them a psychologist, a mental health specialist, but we had regular calls about how we were doing. The crew that we were liaising with were very conscious about our mental health, the impact on us. We were briefed and coached about our social media, the point of broadcast, how we should lock it down, how we should switch it off, how we should basically hide for a week and that sort of stuff. So we got, to be honest, I think the show itself landed in a way that it didn't create a huge reaction. It was kind of
it was trying to create respect and understanding. Perhaps that was the aim of it. Yeah. So
the
what was your
editorials in the papers were basically, it was nice, it was lovely. There was no kind of like shock horror reaction. I mean, I think if it went out today, there'd be a lot more vitriol around it, but at the time it wasn't. And
what was your motivation? Sorry, I interrupted you again.
The motivation was, and I stand by this today, was if by telling our story we could help one other family, one other person get on with their life in a better, more positive way. That was our motivation. One person to be impacted in a more positive way. And I've met people. I bumped into people who've seen it. I've had people contact me on LinkedIn. I've had people randomly message me, and I also often show the clip because it got featured on Gogglebox on the following Friday. So our clip was the Gogglebox clip at the end of the show. So we probably got more views from Gogglebox than we did live on the show.
I'm an avid fan. Yep.
Yeah, I think on Facebook they pasted like a clip of the Gogglebox clip, and that's had over 6 million views. And there's a whole host of comments beneath the Facebook posting, of which I have dived in there, and I decided it's too toxic and complicated. Yes, there's a lot of positivity in there. There's a lot of people who are advocating and standing up and on my behalf and our behalf. But there's still too much of the negative rhetoric. So yeah, it's not a place I want to go. But yeah, it was I'm sure yours was. It was quite a stressy experience, having a camera, being interviewed. There's
Yeah,
a lot more to it than I'd ever thought. There's a lot of background stuff, B-roll footage. There's going into a cafe to have a conversation and an interview. They're filming your hand, they're filming your feet, they're doing it
mm,
again because there's an aircraft flying over, some
yes,
music was playing.
yeah,
They watch you coming in. So they film the same shot from 5 or 6
yeah,
different angles
yeah,
with one camera. So they're swapping around. You have to redo everything.
yeah. It's
So I
quite
suppose,
interesting to watch them execute their
yeah,
craft. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So now I've got a huge amount of respect for people who do Homes Under the Hammer or
yeah,
some of these daytime programs
yeah.
who think, I bet you've done that 10 times. And when you're walking down the street, I bet I know what's going on there. There's someone running with the camera on their shoulder going backwards, yeah, uh, jumping over the bin as you're walking
You
down the
do get
street.
an insight into the whole thing, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, so
So
like us
it's
then,
a fascinating process. Yeah,
so
fascinating
like
process.
us, you were doing it for altruistic reasons. I wanted to do some
Yeah.
good for,
Yeah,
for
completely.
Chris, our architect.
Mm.
Now, don't get me wrong. I also thought it would be lovely to have some sort of record of the builds as we went along. We talked about having one of those time lapse
Silence. Yeah.
cameras in a tree during the thing, but we never got around to that because we, as it happened, we had grand design. So that was a lovely thing for us, and that's part of the motivation. But really, it was to acknowledge and to give an opportunity to someone else who I didn't owe anything to, by the way. It's not like I changed my mind first time round. Anyway, so that's what we did. But there was always that angle with the show. And the funny thing about the neighbours, and they've long disappeared or moved on. The funny thing was that we'd only just moved into our new house, and with all the flooding in this area, several of the houses round about, they actually had to do something. They really had to shore up or move up or knock down and start again. And we deliberately went online and supported the applications of those who had been so difficult with us. So, it felt a little bit as if, we were taking the moral high ground. And we just didn't want any more aggro, to be honest with you. And, that we've got some great friends around here. But we hadn't made friends yet. All we had was what seemed like antagonism. And a couple of times, I was questioning, why would we want to live here? Well, actually, there were loads of reasons why we would. But when we were having such antagonism from the environment, and we didn't feel like we were accepted and belonged, then you sort of like want to disappear, dig a hole and jump into it and stay there, like hide. But it's all worked out happily,
It's all worked out happily.
very happily.
Happily ever after. It's a bit Goldilocks.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Lysette, absolutely incredible. I mean, we've been chatting away for, well over an hour, including the pre-record green room. Really insightful, really interesting. I've enjoyed our conversation no end. How can our listeners get in touch with you?
Okie dokie. So it depends what you're after. I'm the genius maker. So one website is geared towards people who want to learn how to learn efficiently, quickly. So they pass all of their exams first time with a score of 80% by doing less work. That's Genius Material. So you need to go to genius-material.com. If you're interested in mindset, confidence, procrastination, moving to the next level, then that's geniusprinciples.com. So the first one has a hyphen, genius-material.com for the learning. For the Genius Principles, it's geniusprinciples.com. And Joe, I've had a blast. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
No, it's a pleasure.
And
Absolute
one of the
pleasure.
reasons
Thank
I
you.
wanted to talk to you is because you're such an inspiration. Because
Oh,
when it comes to giving yourself permission to be yourself, you are a great example of that. And I really wanted to
thank
talk
you.
to you.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. That's touching. Thank you so much. Thank you. Lysette, amazing. And a huge thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in, for staying to the end. Please do subscribe if you're not already. You can keep up to date on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, please share this. I have a number of other exciting guests lined up that I'm sure you'll be equally inspired by over the next few weeks and months. And of course, if you'd like to be a guest, then please let me know. I welcome any comments and suggestions on how I can improve future shows, if that's possible, to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. And finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood. It's been an absolute honour and pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.